Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Prophet Isaiah chapter 16 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're looking at a really dramatic text today that details the sudden, catastrophic fall of the neighboring nation of Moab. It's a powerful, sobering picture of what actually happens when human pride collides head-on with ultimate reality. It's intense, but there's a lot we can unpack here. Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to walk through the chapter sequentially so you know exactly how we're breaking down the text's simple meaning. First, we'll get our bearings with the context, then look at the eerie silence in the vineyards, and explore a really surprising moment of compassion from the prophet. After that, we'll examine the complete futility of false worship, draw out some practical life lessons for us today, and finally, wrap it all up with a quick recap. Section 1, Context of Isaiah 16, the Judgment of Moab. Let's establish our place in the story. We're looking directly at the prophetic decree about Moab and their impending downfall. Now, to truly understand this chapter, we've got to look closely at its opening verses. Starting right from verse 1, the text opens with an urgent directive. Moab is told to send lambs as a tribute from Selah, which literally means the rock and is often identified with Petra, all the way to the mountain of the daughter of Zion, which is Jerusalem. See, in the past, Moab was this incredibly wealthy nation that paid heavy tribute in sheep to Israel. But now they're facing an overwhelming enemy invasion, and they're basically being advised to send that tribute to Judah to secure some kind of protection. And in verse 2, the prophet paints this vivid, heartbreaking picture. He describes the daughters of Moab at the fords of the Arnon River. Fords are just shallow river crossings. These women are fleeing in absolute panic. The text says they're scattering like wandering birds violently kicked out of their nest. It's a scene of total chaos. By verses 3 and 4, Moab is desperately pleading with Judah for asylum. They're asking the leaders in Jerusalem to execute justice, to cast a shadow like the night at noonday to hide their outcasts, and to please not betray their fugitives. They're begging, let our outcasts dwell with you, hiding place from the spoiler. And in verse 5, there's this beautiful, contrasting promise. A throne will be established in mercy in the tent of David, sitting in truth and seeking justice. But, as we're about to see, Moab's past actions seriously complicate this desperate plea for mercy. Moving to section 2, silence in the vineyards, the loss of joy. So you might be wondering, why is Moab in such a terrifying position to begin with? Well, we find the answer clearly in verses 6 through 8. The text states plainly, we have heard of the pride of Moab, that he is very proud, even of his haughtiness and his pride and his arrogancy. That right there is the core issue. Moab was notoriously arrogant. They were constantly boasting in their wealth and their security. But the prophet notes that their boastings are empty. They amount to absolutely nothing. And because of this intense, unyielding pride, verse 7 tells us that Moab will wail for Moab. The entire nation is going to mourn. Specifically, they'll mourn for the raisin cakes of Kir-Hareseth. Now, these raisin cakes were a staple luxury food for them, a real symbol of their agricultural wealth, and maybe even used in their idol worship, and now completely destroyed. Verse 8 elaborates on this agricultural ruin. It mentions the famous fields of Heshbon and the legendary vines of Sibmah. These were vines so massive and fruitful that the text says their branches once stretched all the way to the desert and across the sea. But they've languished. The lords of the invading nations have completely broken down the choicest plants. In an instant, Moab's economy, their main source of joy, and the very foundation of their arrogance have been wiped out. As we reach verses 9 and 10, the text paints a chillingly quiet picture. The prophet says, no singing, neither shall there be shouting. No treader shall tread out wine in the presses. I have made the vintage shout to cease. I really want you to notice the specific sensory details here. The text literally strips away all the noise of a once vibrant agricultural life. You can almost feel the emptiness, can't you? The joyous, chaotic shouting of the vintage harvest, the workers stumping grapes in the presses to make wine, all of it has come to an abrupt, staggering halt. And this brilliantly illustrates the stark before and after contrast of Moab's situation. Just think about their condition a short time before. There were singing, shouting, community, and just massive abundance in the vineyards. It was the absolute peak of their pride. But then, look at the reality resulting from the decree. Total devastation, absolute silence. The vintage shout has completely ceased. The simple, everyday joys of their society have been entirely erased. It just shows how thorough and devastating this divine judgment really is. The very source of their pride has dried up entirely. Which brings us to section 3. The prophet's deep compassion, sorrow for the afflicted. As we step into verse 11, we encounter a profound emotional pivot. Honestly, you might expect a prophet who is delivering a harsh decree to an arrogant enemy nation to sound triumphant, or maybe a little vindictive. But instead, the tone shifts dramatically inward. Listen to verse 11 with the solemn tone it deserves. Wherefore my heart moaneth like a harp for Moab, and mine inward parts for Kir-Hareseth. Wow. Even while delivering this unyielding judgment, the prophet feels a deeply rooted empathy for the people facing it. He says his heart moaneth like a harp. The Hebrew text uses this vivid metaphor of internal, vibrating strings to convey a deep, resonant, and uncontrollable sadness. He isn't cheering for their downfall from the sidelines, not at all. He is deeply mourning the tragic human cost of their immense pride. Now, let's quickly clarify that specific location mentioned at the end of the verse. What exactly is Kir-Hareseth? Well, looking purely at the plain, simple meaning, the pashat of the text, Kir-Hareseth was a primary fortress city. It was a major, heavily defended stronghold within the nation of Moab. So the prophet is looking directly at the most secure, fortified location in the enemy's land, the ultimate symbol of their military strength and architectural pride, and he's weeping over it, because he knows that even their strongest brick and mortar walls cannot protect them from the reality of what's coming. Section 4. Futility of false worship, prayers that do not prevail. Let's see how Moab reacts to this crisis. Let's look at verse 12. When the vineyards go silent and the great fortress cities are threatened, where do they turn for help? The text tells us, "And it shall come to pass, when it is seen that Moab hath wearied himself upon the high place, that he shall come to his sanctuary to pray, but he shall not prevail." This verse highlights a truly tragic irony. The people of Moab are physically exhausting themselves. The text says they have wearied themselves, running up to their religious sites to pray for deliverance. But it's an entirely empty effort. The false altars they're trusting in simply do not have the power to save them. To make sure we're perfectly clear on the simple meaning here, let's define these terms. A high place or sanctuary in this specific historical context refers to elevated locations built specifically for idol worship. Moab is throwing all of their faith, all of their energy, and all of their desperate hope into sanctuaries dedicated to Chemosh and their other false gods. But because the foundation of their hope is false, the text guarantees their failure. They put in the massive effort, they cry out the desperate prayers, but as the verse plainly states, they shall not prevail. There's no salvation there. Let's move to the concluding verses of the chapter, verses 13 and 14, and see how this builds. This is the word that the Lord spoke concerning Moab in time past. But now the Lord hath spoken. What we're seeing here is the absolute unshakable certainty of the spoken word of God. The text makes a really clear distinction between prophecies given in time past, meaning earlier decrees about Moab's eventual judgment, and the immediate pending fulfillment happening right now. The prophet specifies in verse 14 that within exactly 3 years, the glory of Moab will be brought into contempt, and only a tiny, feeble remnant will survive. While Moab's false sanctuaries failed him completely, the true word is definitively and historically established. So, we've walked through the prophet's exact words step by step. We've seen their panicked flight, their overwhelming pride, the silence of those legendary vineyards, the prophet's mourning, and the total failure of their false idols. But I want to pivot from ancient history to the present day for a second. I want you to ask yourself, what can we actually learn from Moab's fall? How does this ancient prophecy, with its very plain and simple meaning, apply to you and me right now in our daily lives? That brings us to section 5. Practical life lessons, applying the text today. Because we aren't just here to read history, right? We're here to find actionable takeaways for our own lives. So the crucial point is, first, compassion, even in judgment. Just as the prophet wept with a heart like a harp for the enemy fortress of Kir-Hareseth, we've got to maintain empathy for others. Even when someone is facing the direct consequences of their own destructive pride, we shouldn't rejoice or gloat. We must keep our humanity and our compassion completely intact. Second, the danger of trusting false sanctuaries. Moab trusted their wealth, their massive vineyards, and their idol high places. For us today, a false sanctuary might look a little different. It might be our bank account, our ego, our career, or our social status. But when a real crisis hits, those false idols will not prevail. They just can't hold up. And third, the ultimate certainty of the word. Reject the false sanctuaries and trust the truth. The word spoken in time past absolutely comes to pass. It is literally the only foundation that stands firm when everything else collapses around us. Finally, Section 6, Recap and Conclusion, our journey through the text. Let's lock this in. Let's visually and chronologically recap the narrative arc we just walked through. We started by seeing Moab's panicked refugees and their immense historic arrogance. Step 1, joy ceases in Moab. Because of that arrogant pride, the loud, vibrant vineyards go completely and devastatingly silent. Step 2, the prophet mourns. Instead of gloating, we witness the deep internal compassion of the prophet, his heart vibrating like a harp for the afflicted people. Step 3, false prayers fail. In their panic, Moab exhausts itself at high places that offer absolutely zero salvation. And step 4, the word is established. The prophetic decree spoken is certain, historically true, and absolutely inevitable. Before we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. Where do you turn for sanctuary when the vintage shout ceases in your own life? When the everyday joys suddenly stop and a real, undeniable crisis hits, what is your foundation? Are you wearying yourself on a false high place of your own making, or are you anchored securely in the truth? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.